So, what are we going to talk about today, Mac?
Mike, you said it best earlier before we turned the camera on. Sometimes the conversations we get into in the first 10 or 15 minutes that we get together maybe are the best. Now, what we planned to talk about was the Democrat Socialist of America, right? The socialist communists that have overlaid themselves over the Democratic Party. And they have some very unique ideas, but that may not be the best topic for us to talk
Well,
about
it's
today.
one to start out with. We can move to Iran, and God forbid we move to religion. But go ahead and start with
Well,
the
it
DSA.
was a good conversation about religion and agnostic versus atheist versus believers. So, but yeah, let's talk about the Democratic Socialists because it's interesting over the past couple of weeks how Democratic Socialists, that is, socialists who have joined the Democratic Party, and while they claim to be Democrats, insist on the Democratic Socialist label, even though they believe not very much of what the Democratic Party stands for. In fact, one could argue they believe in communist principles, but rather simply overlaying them with the word Democrat to try to provide a little bit of camouflage, a little bit of something to hide behind, which doesn't surprise me at all. A lot of people who want to be revolutionaries are not necessarily interested in showing their true colors right away. Usually they want to show them after they've been able to make some progress. What does surprise me is the traditional Democrats who seem to be going right along with this socialist agenda.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, okay, so for the audience sake, just in case they are not caught up, what are the some of the platform things that the DSA wants to institute?
This was almost seems like crazy, the other day, Donald Trump was talking about the leaders of Iran, and he said, they're cuckoo, they're crazy. And that's the way I want to talk about the Democratic Socialists. Their platform. I saw this interview with one of the leaders of the DSA, and the interviewer says to him, so I understand you're interested in dissolving the Senate. And the guy says, yeah, that's part of our platform. That's one of the planks of the platform. We want to get rid of the Senate of the United States of America. He said, that's not really revolutionary. That's not really outlandish. That's not really. He said, we want to do a couple of things. We want to get rid of the president. He said, we want to get rid of the Supreme Court. We want everyone to be subordinate to the Congress. That is what they're referring to the House of Representatives, so that you have elected representatives that are relatively close to the voters and they control everything. Well, what happens to our form of government, the representative republic, with the three co-equal branches of government? That kind of goes away, doesn't it?
Checks and balances are gone.
Worked for 250 years. Are you sure you want to stand up and say that out loud?
Well, not only that, they want to get rid of police.
Yes.
They want to defund them. They want to get rid of ICE. No more immigration and
They want to
customs.
get rid of the military.
They want to get rid of the military.
Defend the nation.
Yeah. So, I mean, it seems like a suicide pact. But, then they also talk about the economics and that, you and I know very well, and I like this example. You go to a college campus and you say to a straight A student, okay, you're for a socialist view. So what we're going to do is you got an A, we're going to take your A away, 1 point, we're going to give you a B, but we're going to take that 1 point and we're going to give it to a failing student. And we're going to do that enough so that everybody comes up to a C. How's that? Everybody's equal at a C. Well, it ruins incentive, and they all get it at that point. But until you put it in a way that people can understand, until it becomes personal, nobody really gets it. But they're not wrong in the sense that, housing costs are more expensive. It's harder for children to get a start. There's a lot of problems, but destroying capitalism isn't the way to do it.
I would have to agree for a lot of different factors that our capitalist economic system today is not as easy to grab hold of and step up two or three rungs as easy as it was for us when we were entering the job market in the 70s and the 80s. You know what I mean? Our generation, I think, may have had it a little bit easier. And part of the reason is there wasn't the global kind of, competition. America in the mid 70s and up until maybe the late 80s was much more of a, we hadn't opened up China yet, right? Remember when Nixon went to China the first time and we opened up their markets, and what did they do? That brought in the offshoring of a lot of jobs to Asian nations where labor was relatively cheap. So I don't dispute that many of the young people today have a more challenging few steps up the ladder to get to that, middle class and upper class, and eventually to be that millionaire and billionaire class. But just because it's a little bit harder doesn't mean that the system of capitalism isn't still the best system we have going.
Yeah, NAFTA became a big problem too, along with what was it, GATT that came before that.
Yep.
And of course, Trump redid NAFTA. But the point is, I'm not sure I agree with you 100%. Now, I came into the job, I'm like 2 years younger than you, year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
Um, so I remember Jimmy Carter was the president. Uh, the economy was in really rough shape. We had the oil embargo and the shortage. And the job market when I came in was really, really tight because unemployment was so high. I mean, I don't know, it's like 12, 14%, something crazy. So when I hear young people say today, well, I can't find a job. Oh my God, you should have tried when I was your age. Now that sounds like an old fart saying, I walked 10 miles to school up and downhill both ways. Um, and so maybe there's other factors as you brought into the conversation about we had not yet destroyed our industrial base. So there was that ability to climb and make money and things like that and buy a home earlier. I didn't buy my first home until I was 35. They say the average today is like 40. Well, it's only 5 years difference, but still 5 years is 5 years.
But the other part of it, Mike, was as part of the baby boomer generation, we had all that mass number of baby boomer. We had that big glut of people the same age. And so at a time when we were still growing jobs in America, but there were a whole lot more competition. There are jobs available today. But what we see now with globalization is we have non-American workers coming into the workforce and oftentimes working for lower wages than Americans are willing to take. That whole group of visa class, right? The H-1B and all the other various, they bring tech workers from other nations to take jobs that ordinarily would have gone to American workers. And that's a real thing. I mean, that's a real issue. And of course, the employers would argue, well, without having the importing workers, we wouldn't have enough tech workers, et cetera. But you look at the explosion of AI and rockets and robots and all these new technologies, there's a lot of new jobs being created.
Yeah, but it's also like a second industrial revolution where some sectors are going to lose for a long time, but there'll be modifications along the way. One of the things that you mentioned about the H-1B visa strikes me because we keep talking about skilled workers. And, the problem is we are our own worst enemies. Some other countries, we were just talking about student loans the other day. And in other countries, they'll only fund things that the country is short on.
Yes.
You need more engineers? Okay, the government will give you a student loan to become an engineer or a doctor if you need doctors. But they're not going to give you something to become a social worker. I mean, they're not going to fund that.
They're not going to fund gender studies or
liberal arts in general.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So, in a lot of ways, we're our own worst enemy. That's why we have to import the people for the H-1B visas because they're being trained in a different way in those countries than we are here.
Yeah.
Or they have the aptitude and the desire to be trained in those fields. And they come from countries that,
value
that, and they don't have a lot of opportunity for it. So they have to come here in order to get the education. But then a lot of times what happens is they take that information, they go home, and they help their country.
Sure.
Some people want to force them to stay and work here if they're going to get an education.
But that's part of the capitalist society that often goes unmentioned or unnoticed or maybe even unrealized. The old story about you build a better mousetrap and the world will be a path to your door. What does capitalism do? capitalism incents innovation. Innovation is where you get that build a better mousetrap. So what we do in this country, not only based on our unique willingness, Americans' willingness to take risk is greater than some other organization, some other countries, some other societies. It just is. The people that created a new nation by ever westward expansion. I mean, that builds a certain kind of attitude in your DNA. Americans, the rough and rugged, cowboys who settled the West. I mean, that's real. There's a real component of America wrapped up into that. And I think that when you look at that and you apply it to capital in a capitalism economic system, you get paid for building the better mousetrap or whatever it is.
Taking risk,
yes,
as well.
Yes. One of my favorite stories is Elon Musk made a scat of money. He was part of the group that created PayPal. They all became millionaires. So what Elon Musk did is he took a lot of his money and he created Tesla, which is one successful, but he also created SpaceX
and Boring Company
but he was trying to be the only private citizen to send rockets into space. The first 3 attempts all failed. Spectacular failure. He was down to the last few bucks in his pocket with attempt number 4 when he succeeded. Now, and we talked about this the other day.
Yep.
Everybody who was part of SpaceX from the beginning became millionaires when the company went public. Well, isn't capitalism and the incentive for innovation that's driven by capitalism and our natural nature of being inquisitive and our natural nature of being risk takers, isn't all that wrapped up in the American story that is unique in the creation of SpaceX?
Yeah.
And could SpaceX have ever been created in Russia or China or nations where they limit thought, they limit thinking? You must think within this section of what we're going to allow you to develop. And I would argue no. That's our discussion often.
Yeah.
Why the Chinese are not as good. They're very good at stealing our technology.
Right. Yeah, they could copy.
Yes, and even improving it once they've stolen
it. Same. Yeah,
Israel does. But creating it the first time, they're not so good at it.
No, and if you look at Europe, I did a recent study into that. They are falling way behind in innovation. And that's because they have this quasi-democrat socialism or welfare state with a representative government. Anything that reduces your capital, reduces the amount that you have available to take a risk. Now, in some cases, I'll take myself for an example. I spent 23 years in the Air Force. Go ahead and cough because we can always edit, but I'll talk. So I spent 23 years in the Air Force before I was able to get a retirement at 44 years of age. And I had saved up a little bit of money, inherited just a tiny bit, not a lot. And I decided, okay, I can take the time and the risk to start my own business. And I had to have enough money to survive 5 years with no income other than my Air Force retirement was certainly not enough to pay for my home and all the bills. But it gave me a little bit of a cushion. But I had to dip into my savings to do that. And at one point, after I opened one business and it started to become successful, which was information technology, development technology, and soon worked its way into business consulting, I decided, because one of my partners was a mortgage broker for Allied Mortgage. He said, well, we dominate on the web for any kind of search for mortgages in Pennsylvania through our directory system that we developed. And so we opened up a mortgage company. It took us a year to get licensed, get the office inspected, and do the work behind it. And we were in business for less than a year when the housing market in 2008 collapsed. I've told this story a bunch of times. So I gained everything. My accountant even said, you got to spend more money so you can take more tax deductions. You're just going to tax you to death. So I took that and I opened up directories in 8 states. Plus I had the mortgage company. But a year later, the housing collapse happened and the whole mortgage company went, tango uniform, we say tits up in the military. So I lost my shirt, but I had enough residual income from my other businesses to carry me through. I never recovered fully, but I'm not going to start. But the point is, risk taking is something a lot of people are averse to. And if you can fall back on the government or rich people, as the DSA wants you to do, take from the rich and give to the poor, there's no risk involved. And without the risk, there's not that fight, that incentive that I work 12-hour days, 7 days a week until I make this thing work. And that's what I had to do.
And fear is an incentive too.
Fear is certainly
when you have fear,
losing
lose everything, right? Then that's a powerful motivator. The point I'm trying to make, Mike, is that these socialists are talking about all these, get rid of the police, get rid of the military, take from the billionaires and give to the people who have nothing. In that kind, you want more of something, give it away, make
incentivize it that way. Yeah.
If you want less of something, so what do we know about the billionaire class? The way our tax code is written, the billionaire class have these accountants that can figure out how to take the loopholes and how to pay less taxes. The lower class, the people that are just getting on those first couple of rungs of the economic ladder, they don't have enough money to really be taxed. So what these socialists are talking about with their plans is really destroying the middle class. That's who's going to pay. Those people that can least afford it. Now, I understand, when I was first starting out, you could buy a house for not much more than they're getting it for an entry-level car today.
That's right.
You can't buy those houses today. If you can, they're defunct crack houses filled with rats and roaches. I mean, you wouldn't want to live there. And you wouldn't want to live in those neighborhoods. So, the value of real estate over the past 20 years has increased exponentially. What you paid for your home, it's probably worth 2 or 3 times what it was when you bought it. And those are the prices that these young people have to pay. So when you say I had to wait till I was 30 or 40, whatever age it was before you bought your house, these young people are faced with the same kind of thing. That's one of the disappointments they have when you talk about the American dream, right? The American dream is a house in the suburbs, a white picket fence, 2 kids and a dog. And the young people today are putting that off longer and longer. There's many factors to that. One of the big factors, I think, and we've talked about this before, the cost of a college education versus the value of it. You and I got a great college education, or great college education was available to us at a relatively modest cost compared to today's tuition and room and board and all those other things. And, one could argue that, I don't want to upset people, but typically education is the home of the intellectual and the left. And they don't mind raising prices and raising prices and raising prices. So the education you get, first, the education you get today in gender studies or some of these other basket weaving courses is not as valuable to industry, and it costs a lot more. Interesting to note, the only debt you can never escape under any, even if you go bankrupt, is college debt. Now, there was a story here I read recently where the employers in Silicon Valley, some of our best and brightest, where we create all these new ideas, all these new technologies, they went to Cal Berkeley and they said, we don't want to hire your graduates. We would rather hire graduates from the University of Georgia. And of course, all of Stanford and Cal Berkeley and all these very, very exotic, high-cost universities in the West. What do you mean? We're Stanford. Yeah, but you're graduating people that are dumb. You're letting in people with lower test scores to balance out by a quota system the diversity of your class, and then you pass them along without really challenging them. We can go to the university in Georgia, we can get a guy ready to be valuable and ready to be able to contribute to our business, where it takes us 2 years to train up the the graduate from Stanford that wants to go to work for us. And they were challenging these universities to reestablish their high standards. That's part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, you're right. And I read, and I don't know if it's true, but at one point I read this, and I think it is true. Graduate college, you usually end up working for a guy that never went to college or only went part time and dropped out and started his own business.
Bill Gates never got his degree.
Yeah. I don't know how many that's true for, but it's significant. And we talk about getting rid of billionaires, as you said earlier. It's like, oh my God, can't do that because guess what? The top 10% pay something like 60% or 70% of the federal taxes.
Yeah.
People don't understand that either.
Yeah.
Now, did they point to a handful of guys? Like, who's the one rich guy that just has investments, so he doesn't pay anything more than capital gains? Will Buffett?
Oh,
Warren
Buffett. Yeah,
Buffett.
yeah. Warren Buffett.
And he's the one that even says, my secretary pays a higher tax rate than I. Well, nobody's stopping you from giving more to the federal government than Mr. Buffett, number one. Number two is they're talking about taxing what we call unrealized capital gains.
Oh my God,
that is another loser. And if people don't understand what that is, it's very simple. Is say you invest in a 401k or some kind of stock market or mutual fund, you increase by whatever percent that increases a year. And even if you don't take the money out, you're taxed on that increase. The next year you could lose. Do you get the refund? No. So taxing unrealized capital gains is not good either. There's a lot of problems with the Democrat Socialists of America system. And I guess 66% of the Democrat Party agrees basically with, quote, Democrat socialism and 31% straight socialism, which it's just a Trojan horse anyway to move its way to full socialism and then a communistic style government.
The crazy part for me, Mike, is that these socialists and these communists from all over the world are flocking to the free society. When the Berlin Wall got knocked down, you did not see people from Berlin flooding East Berlin. In fact, it was the other way. The people that were under the communist rule all ran to the other side of the wall. And that's because that's when they had all the exotic cars and the nice clothes and the good food and the good jobs and all those kinds of things. What happens when you institute socialism, there's this concept that the people control the manufacturing. They control all of the goods and products and services that are created. The reality of it is that what really happens is the elite few of the, quote, in group, the party, they're the ones that control, and everyone else, their standard of living drops. And that's true everywhere.
It's funny.
What's going on in Cuba today?
Yeah, but it's funny you say about the Berlin Wall falling. So I spent time in Germany before and after the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And now we were then free to go over to East Germany. I declined to go with some of my friends, but when they came back, they said, "Oh, just be glad you didn't go." They said the misery is everywhere.
Yeah,
you walk into a restaurant and they don't even care to serve you. They will let you sit there for an hour. They don't care because the communist society disincentivized, service. What's the point? I'm going to get paid either way.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody's going to give me the crumbs that I get.
Yeah.
So, but it took a few years, and I heard from my friends later that, as the Eastern Germans got accustomed to free enterprise and capitalism, even though it's highly taxed in Germany, they started to become more service-oriented. And
sure, more entrepreneurial. Every time there's an opportunity for gain, there's incentive to reach for that gain.
Same thing happened to my friend Stan from used to be Yugoslavia. He left when Yugoslavia. He was from Croatia, and he's been back. And there's pros and cons to that. You can still see the remnants of the communism today.
Well, Cuba's obviously a communist society. They kicked out all the capitalists in 1959 and 1960. Interestingly enough, Fidel Castro was a relatively wealthy person in Cuba. His family owned a big ranch and sugar plantation and all that kind of stuff. So the family he belonged to was well off. They were pretty wealthy. And if you look at the Democratic Socialists of today in America, most of them tend to be in that 20, 30 age range and tend to be more well off than the average American. So
Yeah.
there's something about that, what I'll call that easy living, right? That living that doesn't take a lot of stress or doesn't create a lot of stress for you or demand a lot of effort from you, that leads people to this utopian thought of utopian society. And that doesn't exist. It's failed every place it's been tried.
Yeah, it's funny. Some people tie it to guilt for having that much money. Uh, but I wonder too if these people, once they're in office and they get older, are they going to be able to live up to their own standards like Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
Everybody remembers in the early days he said millionaires and billionaires. Now he's a millionaire. Guess what? He doesn't talk about him.
He's a
Millionaires.
multi-millionaire. Yeah.
He's multi-million. He's talking about billionaires only. So, again, nothing matters till it becomes personal. Good saying from my friend Stan that came from a communist nation. But, that cuts both ways too.
Sure.
So, for example, if you don't have health care, you can't afford it, and you're going to want the socialized system because at least it gives you something, even if it's horrible. It's better than nothing at all. So, everything cuts both ways. I keep going back to Thomas Sowell, who was the great economist, from Harvard, the black guy. And he's 98 years old now, I think.
Something.
Still kicking. And he said everything's a trade off. So you can have these things. But the question is, what are you going to trade in order to get it? See, that's the thing nobody ever stops to think about. We suffer from that under the capitalist system, too. Congress and the House of Representatives every year has to come up with a budget. Well, there's only so much money. Now, they can print more, and they've done that, and that causes inflation. So you can't do it too often or too much, but we certainly have because we're deeply in debt now. But, they know somewhere in the back of their mind, we can only go this many trillion before we just break the whole system. So they take it right up to the edge. But even when you take it to the edge, you still have to trade off. That's what Congress and the Senate does. A bunch of trade. They're trading back and forth. I'll give you this bridge money for your hometown if you give me this for my hometown, or I'll vote with you. It's all a matter of trade-offs, everything. Same thing when you own a business. When you work for someone, you're trading your time for the owner's money.
Mm-hmm.
When the owner runs the thing, he's trading his money for your time because he can't do it all.
Right.
So everything is, whether you want to believe it or still kind of in the barter system.
Yeah, I get that. And, I saw an interview with a Cuban couple last week, and the woman says, they asked her about democratic socialism, and she was violently against it. She said, we left Cuba to come here to get away from the socialists. And her husband was sitting there. She said, my husband was a professor at the university, and his pay was $13 a month. And she said, if he works in the university here, he makes a whole lot more money. And I mean, a doctor's $20 a month. Now, how many times did you hear the leftists and the liberals and the progressives tout the Cuban hospital healthcare system, right? They don't even have bandages, Mike.
Yeah.
They don't have bandages. So, it's one thing to say it's universal healthcare and it's great. Everybody gets it for free. But what's the quality of the healthcare?
Mm-hmm.
And what about these healthcare professionals? How much money are they being paid? And what kind of incentive do they have to be excellent doctors, excellent physicians, excellent nurses, excellent whatever? They don't. They're making the same amount of money regardless of, and it's not very much money.
Yeah, my friend Stan, he's getting ready to retire here in the United States, and he's probably got to move back to Croatia because all he's going to have is Social Security. But his Social Security, he's a citizen of the U.S. And of Croatia. So when he goes back, his Social Security check over there is going to be more than the average median income in his country. But he went back when his mom and dad were sick and they were both dying. One of the good things you said about the Croatian socialist medical system was a lot of times they had not just, how EMTs come in an emergency here?
Yep.
They had those kind of vehicles that would go to your home or apartment just for a medical visit so you didn't have to be transported to a hospital. However, when his dad and mom got really sick and were taken to the hospital, when he came home, he said Mike was like a World War II building. The wheelchairs looked like from the 1800s. And they just, he said, our modern convenience hospitals here, He said, it's like walking into a nightmare over there.
Yeah.
But yet they had some good personalized care. So again, what are we at? We're at a trade-off.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we can convince people who are pro-socialist or democratic socialist. Again, the confusing part to me is that socialism has never worked anywhere it's ever been tried. And the other thing is that these traditional Democrats are willing to endorse and accept the socialists calling themselves democratic socialists. I think it's a matter of gaining power. Here's the thing. We have an election coming up this November, and it has the potential to change the complexion of the policies in the United States of America. I wonder if the traditional Democrats will vote more traditional America, or if they will vote with the Democratic Socialists, because that could change that could shift the power from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, basically making President Trump a lame duck president without any ability. Not that he does a lot of things without the authority of the House and Senate right now, but it'll certainly put a damper on some of the policies he's enacted since he's been president. Could change the complexion of our government significantly.
Yeah, I have a personal feeling that because of the heightened awareness of the Democratic Socialists of America's platform, that they're going to lose a lot of the independents. And people have to realize it's not the Republicans or the Democrats that really sway the election. It's always the independents. That some of them lean more left, most of them lean more left. But that just gets too downright crazy for a lot of people. But again, I go back. Republicans also need to wake up and start to think about the problems that they've outlined.
Sure.
Because, like I said, AOC and Bernie Sanders, they're not wrong about everything. I say that constantly. So it's kind of like Hillary Clinton when she did what was it called, Hillary Care or something.
Yes.
They laughed at her, and then of course Bush comes into office, and then he gets distracted with the war in the Middle East after 9/11, and nobody ever went back to the healthcare. So when Obama came in, that was their first agenda, and of course that turned into a mess because no Republicans had any buy-in, no Republicans voted for it, and they didn't take any Republican ideas. It was all very one-sided. And, then Trump even promised to fix it, and he couldn't get it fixed, and they couldn't cooperate in Congress. It just is a mess. And you got to admit, it's a serious problem.
It is.
I had a friend as a doctor. He was Air Force retired guy. He was my personal physician when I retired. He was not a Democrat or a liberal. But he said, Mike, it's true. We both named Mike. It's kind of funny. He said, I've got a patient right now. He's got cancer. He can only afford one of the three drugs that he needs. He said, imagine what it's like to live like that, where you have to decide, I'm going to, die. Which medicine combined, high likelihood it'll save his life. But now he's got to reduce his life expectancy based on his ability to pay for particular drugs.
Yeah.
It's difficult, but there's no good answers because our medicine is so advanced that it's extremely expensive at the high end. We could afford to give everybody in America 1970s style. If we went back to our best medicine in 1970, we can give that to everyone, no problem. But then you want these advanced treatments, it's costing more.
Yeah. Well, I think we've beat up the whole socialist idea. Do we want to take on another subject, or we want to close it up for today?
Well, we're already 35 minutes into it, so maybe we ought to just end it here. And if we want to, we'll do a second one.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit of religion, and let's talk a little bit about the progress in the nation of Iran with the war. But we'll hold that for another session.
Okay,
We'll say Mac and Mike
out.
out.